session. Thank you for coming early. This is an audit work session, and the audit committee has a couple things to propose and recommend to the board. I would like to start with the Auditor General job description. It is posted on board docs for you. This job description has gone through several iterations at the committee level, and so we'd really like for tonight for the school board to discuss it and give us the go-ahead on so that we can move forward on hiring the Auditor General. So I am sitting at Chair Evans' seat here because I have the, what do you call this, the light board? Okay, so if you'll flip your switches, I will call you. I have Ms. Strauss to start with.
Thank you. I support the job description as presented. I think it's very good. It's very clear. The job qualification, if we're going to get into that, the only thing that I would say is that I would recommend CPA because of the professional requirements that come with that. I think it's a very trusted, good professional requirement. But anyway, that's my initial piece, is I think the job description is well done. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And the audit committee did have a long discussion about where the CPA belongs, and any member of the audit committee who would like to discuss that, please just hit your button and I'll give you a chance. Ms. Evans?
I actually was just wondering if we had this in a hard copy, or if we need to, do we have a copy of what we're looking at?
Oh, I apologize. It's posted tonight, so on board docs.
Right, but so we don't have hard copy of what we're looking at.
If board members would like a hard copy, is it possible to print out a few, Ms. Mulberg?
I would appreciate that, thanks.
Okay, sure, yeah, thank you, we'll do that. So I guess while we're waiting to see if anyone else, Mr. Wilson. Go ahead.
Thank you, Committee Chair Hines. The questions I have are very minor questions, and maybe these will, maybe you could answer them, or maybe somebody else in the committee, but I suspect you can. Just looking at the duties and functions section, in number 7, the final clause, it says oversees and leads investigations of financial wrongdoing conducted by the audit office. Is that to distinguish it from something else? Was there a reason for that? I mean, obviously, wouldn't they all be conducted by the audit office?
I think it's possible. Yeah, I think this is probably trying to parse out those investigations that would
arise somewhere else.
Somewhere else, yeah.
Okay.
I forgot to introduce Ned Holland, if you just want to wave. Ned is the community member on the audit committee, and also Chase Ramey behind him has been very helpful. And yeah, basically, Chase, your shop drafted this, but I think I'm correct in saying that the reason we put in conducted by the audit office in there is because other investigations go on in the school system. Is that right?
That's correct. We were just taking what was there and trying to make it more clear, and there was some discussion among the audit committee about that, and so that was just the attempt to provide some clarity to that language. It wasn't meant to unnecessarily limit it, but just try to be responsive to what the audit committee was discussing.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like maybe not. So you don't want to overly sweep in things to that. Okay, and then in number 8, we have protocols and procedures. Is there a distinction, or is that just a drafting issue?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm glad Ms. Weatherman is also here. Sorry, I didn't introduce Ms. Weatherman. What do you understand to be the difference between protocols and procedures? Is that clear to you?
Oh, actually, it's that.
I was going to say
again. It's one of those pieces where it was, I think, just part of the drafting. We were, as Ms. Hines said, this has been kind of several versions, and so we were scaling it down, and that was actually holdover language from the original job description that then, as we bulleted the points, was in there, and so it was one of those that we didn't refine further. I think you could take out one of the words. I think there could be some differences between protocols and procedures, but
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that they need
Yeah.
to be changed. I just was wondering whether or not when you were in the drafting, there was some thought process in terms of those two word choices.
It just didn't stick out to me as something that
Okay.
we needed to change.
Okay. But by this point, you're probably all grateful that I wasn't involved in the drafting of this. Okay, so and then finally, in number 9, performs other related duties as required or assigned. Would that be by the school board in the assignment? Or is there another source of assignments?
The school board is the supervisor of the AG through the audit committee as well, and so it would be under the school board or potentially the audit committee, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's my understanding, the only person who can assign work to the Auditor General would be the school board as a whole.
Okay. And then the last thing is just, obviously, the prior board went through the process of hiring the Auditor General. Was there any key lessons that the committee had as takeaways from that prior experience of hiring the Auditor General that guided this process or changed what was done the first time?
Well, I'd be happy to recognize anyone else on the board who'd like to answer that. I think one of the changes we talked about in the audit committee was changing the schedule grade, which we had as a, remind me, 33, US 33, and we changed it to an LT1, which actually raises the salary possibility, right? The salary option a little bit higher. And that was something that I do recall. We weren't sure whether the salary cap that we had before limited, but we were a little concerned about that.
Maybe phrasing a little differently. I guess, was the process one that was very difficult to find an appropriate candidate in the process that you used last time? And did that result in any changing in the thinking of how the process? Yeah.
Ms.
Anyone,
Strauss
really.
would like to answer.
First of all, this, the duties and the job description is much tighter, which I
Okay.
think it's clear. What are the duties of this person? And in the last hiring process, the school board interviewed many people, and in order for it to settle down. So it was a challenge. Hopefully it will not be quite so much of a challenge.
I see. So hopefully we'll have a better set of final candidates that are kind
I
of
do
all
think this is
closer.
a much tighter.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's,
description. It's
I
much clearer.
actually don't have anything else, and I think it looks pretty good. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you. Ms. Evans.
Thank you. So I just had one question. It's on the major duties, essential functions, and number 7 talks about oversees and leads investigations of financial wrongdoing conducted by the audit office. So as I understand it, we will, we do have processes for that, and I believe the audit committee is honing those processes, and that will come to us separately. Is that correct?
Yes, we have 2 other documents that we've been working on. One is the charter, which we have really pared down, and we're going to recommend be a policy rather than a regulation. And it will be very general. We have really hacked away at that. But then the regulation regarding investigations, which is currently now 1410, the audit committee is also working on, and we will bring back to the board with recommended changes as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Okay, if anyone on the audit committee would like to speak to why we decided to put CPA as a not required but preferred, to Mrs. Strauss's question, if there's anyone. Mr. Holland, Mr. Holland, go ahead.
Since I'm probably the one who caused that, I suppose I ought to own up to it. I've hired auditors before, auditor generals before. I've known 3 state auditors, and I've seen very, very good people in this position who were not CPAs. And while it's fine to have a CPA, certified public accounting is about financial records and financial certifications. That's not what an auditor general does, and so it's really a little bit of a different function. It's fine to have a CPA as the auditor, but it's not core to an auditor's responsibility to be able to sign off on financial reports, which is why I think we ought to leave it as ideal or preferred, but not as required. We could easily find a person who is entirely qualified, in fact, more qualified than we've seen in the past, who is not a CPA.
Okay, thank you. Ms. McLaughlin?
Thank you. I guess one of the first questions I had, and first do want to comment a note of appreciation to the Audit Committee. I know that having attended some of the meetings, this has been a Herculean effort to really bring this job description into what we're seeing here tonight. So that's very much appreciated. The first thing under job qualifications, since we're talking about it, under certifications and it's under preferred versus minimum required none, I guess I'm a little still unsure about that, because I do like the idea of what Mr. Holland said, that you don't necessarily need a specific certification, like you don't want to restrict applicants that they must be a CPA. However, under preferred, where it lists out 3 different certifications that I can see here or equivalent as preferred, I'm just wondering, wouldn't we want to have candidates that at least has one of these? So a minimum would be, you've got to be certification in at least one of these areas. If you preferred might be, we'd say more than one certification. But I'm wondering, Ms. Weatherman, maybe you could speak to this, especially as someone who's in the field. What might that signal to possible candidates if we're saying, we might even hire you and you don't have any certification at all? And Mr. Holland, then if you might be able to, again, as the subject matter expert, weigh in after Ms. Weatherman, having done this type of work, you might say, I've seen great executives who wouldn't have any of these, and you can share that. But I was wondering, Ms. Weatherman, if you might speak to that first, about why we wouldn't want to have it move to minimum, just to have at least one certification.
Thank you. There's a couple points that I think would be helpful. What Mr. Holland says about not having any, I've seen that in large audit organizations, IG, or excessively large audit departments. I think this sends 2 messages. One, it sends to the staff, who all staff that are going to report to this individual, it's a staff of 8 total. All of us are required 1 or more certifications, except for 1 position, and that is desirable for the lowest level audit position. In fact, the Deputy Auditor General is not only required to be a CPA, but I am also required to have an advanced degree or a second certification. And having somebody without that level of knowledge and experience, I think part of the staff is looking at, like, why do we have to have something that the people who are supervising us don't? That's not to say experience doesn't say something. I think you can find a lot of qualified people with very relevant experience that are more than capable of doing the job. The certification provides a level of respect that sometimes not having the certification has. One of the most difficult things to try to help explain to staff or anybody else that it asks, some of our peers in other jurisdictions have even questioned, why are you being supervised and not have somebody that's qualified to do the job? That doesn't necessarily mean they're not qualified. When we're doing a financial audit, the CPA is what you're resting on or relying on. That's okay, but the person who is supervising us has editorial authority over that. They're going to be changing the words. They can even change the opinion. That then puts a level of uncertainty to those of us who have rested on those licenses in order to form those opinions. It also brings to the table a level of standards that are expected. I'm not hung up on one certification or another, but I think some form of certification would be nice to have. It would, as part of this position, not necessarily have to be the CPA, but CPA, CIA, CISA, or equivalent, which leads us open to, there are other relevant certifications that would put you there.
Mr. Holland, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Yes. The problem with listing one or the other of those three is that you thereby could come up with someone with one of the others who wouldn't be qualified by virtue of a minimum required. So if we said minimum required certified internal auditor, we come up with a real good CPA we want, and oh, sorry, we can't hire you because you don't have a certified internal auditor. If you want to say something, and I think it's unlikely that we'd get an auditor that we thought was acceptable who didn't have some certification. So what you might say in the minimum required is some relevant certification. Some relevant certification. Teresa just mentioned there are other relevant certifications. As long as we say we're looking for some certification without specifying which of them, it makes it more likely that we'll come up with a person.
So thank you. So what I'm hearing and what I would advocate to my colleagues about this job qualifications is that you could take what was in the preferred category, because what it said was it listed out 3 certifications or the equivalent, and the language you were saying, or another relevant certification or similar. I think you still could put that under minimum. I think it's very compelling what Ms. Weatherman said, which is you're going to have an entire professional staff in there, and we could be hiring an auditor general where we signaled to the public and we signaled to the candidates, you don't even need to have any professional certification at all. So
Ms. McLaughlin, would you like to propose an amendment then? We can then talk about it?
yes, that's what I was saying, is I think that shifting the preferred over to the minimum, if I understood what Ms. Weatherman said, the way the language says or the equivalent, or as Mr. Holland used the language, or relevant certification or any other relevant certification, means they're going to have at least one of these certifications, and I think that's appropriate given everybody in that office has to have at least one, the deputy has to have 2, and yet we wouldn't require anything of our candidates. I think it's the wrong signal.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand then, there's been a motion that we move that language from preferred into required under certifications, and would you like to change the last clause to or other relevant certification?
If that's the language Ms. Weatherman thinks might sound better than the equivalent.
Well,
That's fine.
what would you like, Ms. McLaughlin? Or other similar, other relevant, or?
Similar. Or I think it's other relevant certification. Other
okay.
relevant certification.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
We have a second by Mrs. Schultz. Ms. Mulberg, do you have that? Okay, thank you. Well, there's a motion on the table. Let's go ahead and talk about that. Ms. Schultz, I see your light is on. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, that's what I was
Okay.
going to talk about anyway, so it was easy for me. I didn't know Ms. McLaughlin was going to offer that, but I had that on my list to talk about. Industry standard certifications are something that we're talking about. I mean, we're an education organization, and we're setting the standard even for high school students to pursue technical certifications. I would not think that we would want to, under the minimum required, pose none. So to say that we have set the bar at an industry level certification such that other subject matter experts and you are on par is a reasonable minimum required. And I agree, and I appreciate the attribution that we might not want to pick one, but certainly the level and caliber of candidate that we're looking for should, at a minimum, have one of these industry certifications. I do have a question of the ones that are listed here. I'm more familiar with the contracting world, the cybersecurity world. Are there other certifications that might be in the or similar? I mean, that's why I suggested or similar to Ms. McLaughlin, particularly as I was seconding the motion. Is there a more comprehensive list, or does this generally cover the main 3, and then what would be the or similar?
These are the 3 most common certifications for auditors. You will have, some will have a risk assessment certification, some may have a certified government audit professional certification, which are not necessarily as common as these three. These three have very rigorous standards in order to get there. There may be an equivalent certification in the financial world. I don't know. Ms. Quinn, do you know of something financial equivalent? These cover that as well. But saying the or equivalent or similar, I think leaves us open because standard setting bodies are constantly creating new certifications, and I wouldn't want to limit us without being open to something else that might come down the pike, because all three of the bodies that set these certifications have others.
Okay, thank you. So to my colleagues, I think that if we put out something at this level of leadership, at this level of responsibility, and message to the type of caliber candidate that we're looking for, that there are no minimum required certifications, I think that sends a very loud message. So I think it's appropriate, I think it's reasonable, and I think it's commensurate to move the certifications over from preferred to minimum.
Okay, Ms. Strauss?
So I would support the amendment. I think Ms. Weatherman's explanation is accurate, and we are certainly looking for someone who we are confident is held to high professional standards in data analysis, in presenting reports to us, and not only the respect of the staff, but I think just in the professional qualifications for whoever it is that we're going to hire. So I would support that amendment. Thank you.
Any other comments? All right, if not, I'll go ahead and call for the vote on the motion, which is to, on the certification piece, to move the language under the preferred column into minimum required and change the last clause to or other relevant certification. All those in favor, raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you. All right, anything else on the job description? Any other thoughts? Yes, Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. My second question just had to do with, again, the really great work that staff did from the prior audit committee meeting, where the goal was under major duties and essential functions to kind of shrink the laundry list of 15 items down to 9. I'm looking at the clean version. We didn't post the marked up version, so I was just hoping maybe staff who worked on this, if you wouldn't mind, under the 9 items, if someone could just maybe capture how did we condense the 15 down to 9? Were there any major duties or functions that got eliminated, or is it just was a matter of trying to go a little more macro in capturing those responsibilities?
Sure, it was a little bit more to your latter point, looking at more macro, and then also looking at phrases where we thought that the duties were repeated from an earlier one, and so trying to reduce the repetition. The audit committee talked a lot about trying to align this more with the Auditor General charge and the policy, and so looking at that as well. And then there was also some conversation about that individuals at this level that are applying for the Auditor General position are going to have a baseline understanding of what this type of role entails, and so making sure we were focused on the big picture pieces of the job rather than on what might be considered more of that day-to-day work.
Great, thank you. And my colleague sitting to my right also did let me know that earlier today our clerk of the board sent out the red line copy, so that's appreciated. I guess I do also want to just share with my colleagues that I think it's noteworthy and appreciated that staff worked with the audit committee in examining, I believe it was 8 different school divisions and their Auditor General job descriptions. So sort of as a benchmark to sort of look at what is going on in other school divisions and trying to make sure that we sort of capture a best practice approach. So that too was appreciated in the work that you did. I don't see any other pressing questions, and again, appreciate the work that's been done to date.
Mrs. Schultz?
That was left on from before.
Oh, I'm sorry. This light board is challenging. Okay, so seeing no other lights on, what I'll do then, I guess Ms. Mulberg could go ahead and get a show of hands of the board that we'd like to go forward with this job description. Okay, all right. So all those who are in favor of moving forward using this job description for the, I'm sorry, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm sorry, with as amended, thank you, yes. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, thank you, that was efficient. We also have the draft timeline for the selection of the Auditor General, and that was also posted. If we could get it up on the screens up here too, that might help anyone who doesn't have it in front of them. The Audit Committee worked on this with Dr. Ramey. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramey, for all the work you put into this. We have already had a work session as a board to look at this, and I don't think there were very many changes from that first conversation. So if everybody wants to take a look at it, you know, the basic phases of the search are there. And, you know, an ambitious, optimistic timeline, but we'll do the best we can to hold to it. Any questions or concerns from board members? Yes, Ms. Huff.
Thank you. I just wanted to let the board know some of the discussion we had around this, and we were aware that some of this timeline overlaps with our superintendent search interviews and timeline. But the discussion we had, and Dr. Ramey can correct me if I'm wrong, was that if we keep it more of this aggressive timeline, we can always push it back if there's any conflicts with our superintendent search and interviews. But to prepare for this more condensed is easier than trying to get it more condensed later. So I didn't know if that would help in context.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes, thank you. I did notice on bullet number 3 where it says the process will include the following phases. Bullet number 3 says in the second sentence, HR will work with the school board to determine the individuals that will serve on the screening and interviewing panels. I've been very thankful that in the 5 years I've served on the board that the common practice has always been that it's a matter of checking which board members wish to serve. So I might be a little more comfortable just not for us now, but serving as a guideline for future work that it would say HR will work with the school board to determine which individuals wish to serve on the screening interviewing panels, because I think that kind of helps set a more clear expectation that it's which board members wish to serve on it, and then that's how you build a calendar, a schedule, and all that. So that would be my one request for just a slight change to the document.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. You're right, it does kind of look like HR will be selecting the board members, and that's not how it's going to go, right?
Trust me, that was not my intent.
Right, but it is important, I think, that HR go through the process of knowing who the board members are who want to participate in each phase, because once you commit to participating in that phase, you've got to stick with the whole phase. But thank you, that's a point well taken. Anyone else? Okay, well, oh, yes, go ahead, Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you. One of the things that I know has been part of the discussion is the fact that we're very fortunate in the school system that we do have citizen appointees to the audit committee. And so I didn't know if it might be appropriate that this draft timeline does somehow recognize that the citizen appointee will participate in this selection process. And I'm not going to try and figure out the wording. I'm just bringing the thinking to the table, and then I do think before we approve this, we might want to just have that, again, somehow noted in here for the public also to understand as well as set board expectations.
Well, perhaps in that same bullet then, if we could just change that bullet a little bit to say candidates are interviewed and vetted during the selection phase. HR will work with the school board and community members of the audit committee to...
We can definitely do that. That's, and I hadn't thought of the first interpretation, but I can see how it reads that way. But that was really kind of trying to take that into account of why it was written there, is because that would give the school board the opportunity, the flexibility to select who participated at what stages. But we can revise it as the school board would like to see.
Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, does that make you more comfortable?
I think it would be good because, again, it's about helping the community understand the value we place on our citizen appointees.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get a show of hands to make sure that the school board is on board with that minor change, which I think we can just trust Dr. Ramey to make. I mean, what do you think? Is it up there? Okay. Mrs. Schultz, yeah.
Yeah, I just want a clarity with the last bullet. It's one thing to serve on the screening and interview panels, but do we need to say in the last bullet or after the last bullet that the ultimate decision is a result of the board alone?
Sure. Can I ask you, are you on the first page there? Last.
The final phase appointment will result
in a recommendation by the school board. Is that right?
Appointment by the board, or the final phase appointment will result in a recommendation for appointment.
For appointment by the school board.
Yeah, that's a strange, because it says twice. The final phase appointment will result in a recommendation to the full board
So,
for the selection of a specific candidate.
When we crafted this, I made some assumptions, and I wasn't making the assumption that the board was going to vote on it. It was really just our ability to line out what the time frame was going to look like and kind of try to encapsulate the process for the board. And so it was never meant, when it came from our shop, to be something that the board was going to adopt. And I would have written it differently, so I apologize, but I was going with the framework that the board would make.
And I definitely understand that, and I would actually agree, Ms. Hines, that we don't necessarily need to vote on it, but I do think for documentation's sake and for transparency to the public, I think it's good that we clarify in writing that which transpires here today, and then we don't have to say, well, what do we exactly mean?
Okay.
And that way it just sets it forth. So the final phase appointment will result in a recommendation to the school board for the selection of, I think that's fine.
Okay, so that language is up there. Thank you. So let's go. If people are comfortable voting up or down on the timeline with the changes that you see in front of you here, go ahead and have a show of hands. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. All right, this work session is concluded. We have, oh yes, Dr. Ramey.
So by the work tonight, since the board's all here, as you would see, our first step would be to post this in our Career Quest on Wednesday. And so because of the work tonight, we will go ahead and move forward. So the timeline's intact. Thank you. And we'll get this posted this week.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ramey, for all your support in this effort. So, okay, we will reconvene at 6 o'clock for the budget public hearing. Thank you.